Welcome to Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. In Guatemala, the trial of former dictator Efraín Ríos Montt who was indicted in January for genocide and crimes against humanity, was suspended on a legal technicality, but now has resumed. To discuss this historic trial, its suspension, resumption, and what it all means for human rights is Truthout Assistant Editor Alissa Bohling. Hello, Alissa. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Ted.
I suppose the first question is a very simple one. What happened?
Well, the trial started on March 19th, and things have been going slowly throughout. Rios Mont's defense has been very disruptive to the trial. They've put up a lot of legal hurdles based on technicalities, procedural issues, and whatnot. But on April 18th, the trial was suspended when a lower court judge ruled that the trial was annulled. And I'm not up on the legal details of why she did that, but while the Attorney General said that was an illegal ruling, it was able to suspend the trial for a full week before it resumed a couple of days ago.
Now, the Guatemala is a country that's been at the center of the Cold War, at least in the Americas, since the 1950s. For those who don't know about the history of this country, can you sort of walk us through this very violent history at times of mass killings, of dictatorships, of just human rights abuses, large and small?
Right. Well, in the 50s, there was a land reform movement that started among the Guatemalan Maya people, indigenous people to that area. They have always worked on plantations and farms of their own, but also agribusiness was very active there. United Fruit Company had a lot of banana plantations that would be threatened by this land reform movement that these indigenous people were pushing for in order to have more control over their own territory. So through a string of connections in the U.S. power elite, in the CIA and the State Department, United Fruit was able to help orchestrate a coup in Guatemala because the current president at that time in the mid-50s supported the land reform. He was the first populist president really to be in power in Guatemala. It's often had a lot of authoritarian governments. So once that happened, all hell broke loose. Basically, we see a lot of, throughout the war, very disturbing and very systemic, very uniform patterns of repression, whether it's torture, scorched earth campaigns across the board, burning down houses, killing children, killing pregnant women, dismembering corpses to terrify the people who did survive.
It seemed like during the 80s, this is when the tensions, or at least the violence in Guatemala, really had become much more pronounced to the point that it spilled over into the international consciousness. Media was covering it more and more. It had become a front page story in many ways, U.S. involvement. But it seems like it followed this pattern that you set up early on, or at least that you talked about early on, from the 50s onward, wherein a pattern of intimidation, a pattern of violence, aggregating power to the top in terms of dictatorships versus more democratic reforms. Has anything changed much in the country since the 80s to now?
Yeah, things have changed a lot. I mean, civil society has a lot of power there now, a lot of visibility. The international community has been very supportive of those efforts. I think you do see divisions, much like you see here in the U.S., conservative Guatemalans who denied that the genocide ever occurred. There was some pamphlets distributed by supporters of the defense claiming that it was a conspiracy, a Marxist conspiracy brought on by the Catholic Church. So you do still have those divisions, but I think because, like in many countries, most Guatemalans are supportive of each other and their communities and human rights and the dignity of life, you've seen a lot more voice given to that in the past few decades.
When this trial was suspended, you had a quote in your article, I believe from Pamela Yates, who said that, and she was somebody that made a documentary about the Guatemalan Civil War. And she said that the defense never planned on mounting much of a defense. In fact, that they were going to use manipulation. And in some ways, and she didn't say this in her quote, but later it seemed to be revealed that intimidation was certainly part of the pattern. Is this just sort of the standard go-to method of politics amongst this old guard in Guatemala?
Amongst the old guard, I think absolutely they're used to getting away with everything, literally murder. and they like to threaten people, they like to intimidate people. They don't always do the dirty work themselves, but certainly it's ongoing. The Attorney General has had someone walk up to her and threaten her in person. People have received emails with skulls in them saying, "You're next." I heard that from Claudia Samoya at a human rights defense group within Guatemala. So there's a lot of, you might look at it as just bullying and harassment and intimidation, but because of the history of the country, you know that these aren't idle threats.
But you said that Guatemala has changed in the last 30 plus, well, really the last 30 years or so. It's essentially not the same country, that there is more international pressure to prosecute for human rights abuses. So it seems like, in a way, now I'm just inferring this, but it seems like that these tactics that you highlighted earlier, they didn't really work in keeping the trial completely suspended.
No, absolutely not. And I think anytime you have a society that's highly motivated for justice and the rule of law, those tactics are eventually going to fail. Just like the trial, they've continued to try and delay it with legal hurdles, but as we've seen, the trial has gone forward because pressure from the international community has been strong, and because the Guatemalan legal system is strong. There was an advocate on the panel that I joined last week prior to writing that story who made a very firm point that we should credit the Guatemalan legal system immensely. Even with all of these hurdles, it has continued to press the case forward, and it's been a peaceful courtroom. It's been packed with people every day. And so we definitely need to give credit to the domestic judicial system as well.
Absolutely. So what do you think this trial means for human rights in general?
I think that because it's the first trial ever to be brought for genocide against a head of state within his own country, we could see a snowball of, once there's momentum in the international community, we could see similar trials in other countries. Whether or not the trial concludes in a certain way, people have stressed over and over throughout this whole time that it's just a victory even to bring Rios Mont into a courtroom in his own country, because he's been so untouchable and his associates have been so untouchable for so many years. So I think it will embolden people. I think it can add momentum. It already has in the outcome. While it's certainly really significant, it doesn't necessarily hinge on that at this point as far as the climate in the human rights community.
You went to Guatemala in 2008, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did you experience when you went?
You know, the economic development, I think, is the most striking. When I was there, they were working on a major highway system. There was bets about what would be finished. First, the local running track, or this highway running across Guatemala, because there was supposedly a lot of graft and things going on. But I think even with the corruption, you see a lot of progress. You see a lot of determination by both local people and people who've come there from other countries to support them. I think that it's a very friendly and open country, while at the same time people don't talk about the war a lot. It's painful memory for people. There's children who don't even learn about it in school. So certainly, like any place, it has its dark history, but it's a very warm and colorful and beautiful place to go. And
part of what you highlight is different from, say, my personal historical memory of Guatemala. And I think that when you read, especially in the mainstream press, about Central American countries, usually the narrative goes along the lines of there is civil strife, either civil war, some sort of violence. But to hear that a country that was so torn by violence, mass killings, genocide, strong-armed dictators are turning this around, both economically, socially, and politically, is really heartening. And I think part of it is the spotlight that has been put on Guatemala by the international human rights community, and making sure that people understand what has happened, not only in the past, but also what this trial means in the present, going forward for Guatemalans now and also in the future, so they can have a better life and not revert back to this era where you had a dictator who could operate, without impunity.
absolutely.
Well, Alissa, I wanted to thank you for being on the program.
Thanks for having me, Ted.
You can read Alissa's writing on this subject on Truthout. And thanks for watching Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.